New UFO proof? 2017, the New York Times drops a bombshell, a classified Pentagon UAP program, and 3 Navy UFO videos. And a disinformation machine was born. Mick West built a career explaining the Navy videos away. But not so fast. Former Obama Pentagon official Marc von Rennenkampff just published the analysis that ends the debate. Mick West's response? Hey everyone, welcome to the Good Trouble Show. I'm Matt Ford. In 2017, the New York Times revealed a classified Pentagon UAP program and 3 Navy videos the government couldn't explain. For the last decade, a cottage industry of debunkers has worked overtime to explain them away. Tonight, that cottage industry collapses. Marc von Rennenkampff is a former Obama appointee at the Pentagon, a former State Department weapons of mass destruction nonproliferation analyst, and an opinion contributor at The Hill. This week, he dropped a 20-minute analysis video that methodically dismantles every debunk of the most famous UFO video in the world. Please welcome Marc von Rennenkampff. Marc, it's great to see you, man. I think the last time I saw you was at that Soul function that was, like 4 months ago. How are you?
Doing well, Matt. Great to see you. Thanks so much for having me. It's a genuine honor, and thank you for everything that you've been doing to bring attention to this very, very important topic. Really appreciate it.
I very much appreciate it, and I have to say back at you, the analysis that you've done on all of these these 3 famous videos and your other work advocating for UAP transparency and I think more importantly, holding the skeptics' feet to the fire about kind of like their debunks and all of the kind of smoke and chaff that they like to put out there with this whole thing. But as I mentioned, people may know you from the columns that you've done on The Hill, really great journalistic work, and you're also doing work for the Soul Foundation as well. But tell us about your actual government background. You have quite an interesting background, and then why the UAP subject matters to you.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So my background in the government, had two different gigs in the government. I was at the Pentagon, at the then Department of Defense, and I was a political appointee working directly for, at the time, it was Secretary of Defense was Leon Panetta, and then also into Chuck Hagel's tenure. And I was part of the advance team. So anytime the Secretary of Defense traveled anywhere, we would be in country ahead of time for a week or so. We'd work with the U.S. Embassy, we work with the host nation, spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, was in Iraq as well. So a lot of fascinating travels, and really got to meet a lot of very interesting characters along the way. Part of the folks, or some of the most interesting folks that I met were aviators, military pilots, both fixed wing and rotary wing, so helicopter pilots. Which is relevant to my kind of evolution into the UAP topic. But suffice it to say, really had a fascinating time at the Pentagon. Had nothing to do with UFOs, UAPs, didn't think about the topic. I thought the topic was squarely tinfoil hat territory. Left the Pentagon. I went to grad school and studied, did a master's program in national security studies, nonproliferation and terrorism, very, very cheerful subjects. Then I went back into the government. I was at the State Department doing nonproliferation work, counter chemical weapons work. This is right when ISIS was mixing up some really nasty chemicals in Iraq and Syria, and did that for a little while. As a contractor, and then got out of government, and I'm out. Again, just to reiterate, I did not have any involvement with this topic, didn't think about it, never touched it while I was in government, only came to it afterwards, after seeing Commander Fravor. I think many of your audience know he was the squadron commander who was involved in the very well-known 2004 Tic Tac incident. Saw him on the Joe Rogan podcast. I think this is fall. This is late 2019, and that's when everything changed. I'd worked with pilots, aviators, I knew how they carried themselves, and Fravier's the real deal. And oh, by the way, it wasn't just him. There were 3 other naval aviators, 6 other eyeballs that saw this object, and that was my ticket down the rabbit hole, and that led to a lot of really interesting research on the history, and then got very involved with skeptics like Mick West, and that only strengthened my interest because I learned after doing an enormous amount of analysis and talking to a lot of folks in the field and in aviation, and talking to experts, learned that people like Mick West have no idea what they're talking about. They're completely making the stuff up as they go, and that it furthered my interest because if they're wrong, then that means there's something to this, and that means these videos are legitimate, and they most certainly are.
Okay, so you mentioned 2017. So New York Times comes out with this bombshell front page article about the UAP issue, Lou Elizondo, this classified UAP program that the Pentagon was saying for years, we don't look into this stuff. And what we're going to talk about first today is the Gimbal video. You touched briefly on the pilots, but for people that have never even heard about this, and we'll play the Gimbal video in a second. Tell us in a broad sense what this video is.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a video recorded from an F/A-18 fighter jet. If anybody knows the Blue Angels, they fly the F/A-18 fighter jet. This is recorded by an infrared camera that is mounted to the F/A-18. It's called an ATFLIR. What you're seeing is a very, very hot object, and we'll get into the kind of the nitty gritty, but it is, compared to its surroundings, this object is very, very hot. It's completely saturated. You can't see any detail of this object, and that's also significant. That means it is very, very hot for that sensor. This was recorded in, I believe, January. Yeah, it was January 2015, so over a decade ago. Remains officially unidentified. And I think there's a reason for that. We'll get into that. But I think this is really important, and I got into this in my analysis video, which I just posted a few days ago. But this incident, this very, very bizarre incident, occurred amid literally years long observations by naval aviators of UAPs, objects that they could not characterize, identify off the U.S. East Coast, and that these objects exhibited very, very bizarre, perplexing flight characteristics. They remained stationary for 8, 12 hours over a particular geographic location. They moved along, at sub-Mach or sometimes at Mach, at speed of sound. And what was really bizarre, and Brian Graves has been very, very outspoken about this. He's a former naval aviator who's been very, very, again, very forward on this. These objects stayed out for lengths of time that normal aircraft just could not accomplish. The duration of these objects, it was just extraordinary, and they were out there all day. And if these were conventional aircraft, they would have just killed their fuel. And they were seeing them mostly by radar, frequently with infrared sensors, as the Gimbal video again was infrared. So once you have that correlation between radar and infrared, you know that there is an object there. And then infrequently, every once in a while, these aviators would see these with their eyeballs, and these were the infamous cubes and spheres observations that Lieutenant Graves has characterized. So again, important context that this Gimbal incident occurred amid those, again, daily observations of unknown objects.
Okay, so before we get into your analysis, which again, you posted this on Monday, we'll have a link to your excellent 20-minute analysis in the YouTube description. But here, let's play the actual footage. This is the original 34-second Gimbal video as released by the New York Times. And yeah, let's take a look.
Dude, there's a on, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. That is the LNS, dude. Well, if there's like... Look at that thing! It's rotating.
Before we jump into this, tell us about the people who were actually there. And tell us a bit about, let's just say that people don't really understand the amount of training and the amount of money that is invested in these pilots. Are these people that could, misidentify something as a balloon or a seagull or something like that? Tell us a bit about their background and what their, really kind of training involves, and also, what this aircraft was. This was, truly one of the most advanced flying machines in the, in the inventory of the United States Navy.
Yeah, that's right, and you bring up a good point, because the aviators in this particular incident were engaged in it's called a composite unit training exercise, but it is basically the last step before they deploy to a war zone. So they are fine-tuning their warfighting skills before they need to go out and literally make life and death decisions with extremely advanced and sensitive sensor suites and weapon systems. So that's what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with again a Navy fighter squadron, multiple Navy fighter squadrons. That were prepping for war. That were, they're highly trained. These pilots go through the equivalent of tens of millions of dollars of training. They're put into aircraft that are tens of millions of dollars, and there is an enormous amount of data, of information, of sensor calibration that goes into these training exercises. And I'll just add one more thing about the training element of this. These observations and the Gimbal incident in particular were so bizarre because they occurred in sanitized training airspace. It is sections off the U.S. East Coast, sections of air that are closed down to any and all traffic, or there are significant limitations on commercial or civilian air traffic that comes through that airspace. And it is a major safety of flight issue, right? They had a near midair collision, and that's what really prompted the squadron to take this very seriously. Is they're again in the sanitized airspace, and they have this near midair collision, and they say, okay, that's it. This is a major problem, and that's what prompted Lieutenant Graves to go public. And there was an enormous amount of frustration that, despite all of the sensors and all of the training and everything that they had at their disposal, they don't know what these objects are that are in their training airspace.
And as I understand it, they were not picking up any of these objects until there was a upgrade in not only the radar of the aircraft, but also the phased array radars used on the carrier battle, on the ships of the carrier battle group, correct?
That's right. So Lieutenant Graves has said quite frequently that these objects were only detected after they upgraded the radar in their F-18 fighters from the older APG-73 to the newer APG-79, which is a phased array radar, state of the art, right? And ultra sensitive. It's a generational leap in technology. And again, when you have these correlations, you have eyeballs, infrared, and radar telling you there's something there. That there's certainly an object there, and the mystery only deepens when these things are hovering in some cases in hurricane force winds, and that has been documented. I mean, you can go back. There are written records of aviators writing down these. They had nowhere else to go but to submit these what they called hazard reports, safety reports that said, hey, there's stuff out there. We're doing dogfighting. One of these days we're going to have a midair collision and lose an aircrew, and guys will die, or we'll lose an aircraft, or whatever the case may be. And they were furious. So very, very serious to have these kinds of incursions.
Okay, and I mentioned Mick West earlier. So Mick West is a debunker, if you want to call him that, or skeptic or whatever. He runs this organization called MetaBunk. Give our audience just kind of a quick overview of what these guys do and how they sort of fit into this whole puzzle.
Yeah, so Mick West and his merry band of debunkers, really a double-edged sword, and I'm going to be objective here. They've done some incredibly good work. Mick has built, I think, almost single-handedly a 3D simulator that allows you to see where, for example, where Starlink flares are. And just recently we had an incident of a country music star who saw Starlink flares, and Mick pointed out where those exactly where they were. Okay, that's great. We do want to separate the signal from the noise. So to be fair, Mick and his crew have done a very good job of, in many cases, identifying prosaic cases. However, with these really perplexing cases, the well-known ones, the Gimbal is really the kind of exhibit A. They, in my opinion, they engage in motivated reasoning. There's nothing scientific or objective about their approach. And I think Mick knows that. He's got a sunk cost fallacy. He's now dedicated time, resources, and investment into this particular theory, which we will discuss. And he's really kind of dug himself into a hole that no amount of data, facts, evidence will change his mind, which is fine. But I think it's important that we point that out, because that kind of unscientific, frankly disingenuous thinking and that kind of an approach does an enormous disservice to this topic. And unfortunately, the news, luckily less so in the last few years, but the media always wants to get the other side. That's fair enough. That's how media works. And for many years, Mick was widely quoted, and he's on CNN pulling out these bizarre little contraptions that have been completely falsified and debunked. And so the point is that he does have a platform, but it's important to also get the truth out there. And I think anybody who's objective can see that his claims or his theories for these very, very well-known videos. The Gimbal, again, is the best known, but the Tic Tac video, we can go up and down the list, are flat out wrong.
Hey folks, before we get back to our interview with Marik, real quick, if you're not subscribed, hit that button, ring the bell, leave a comment, give a thumbs up. I know it sounds like a lot, but here's why it matters. YouTube sees all of that and says to itself, hey, maybe we should recommend this good trouble show to people who don't know it exists yet. And that's how that whole thing works. Also, find us on all the major podcast platforms if you would like to listen to us on the go. And of course, we would really appreciate a positive review. Again, all that stuff helps us out with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that kind of stuff. So, and last thing, and I promise, we have no sponsors on this show. We are kept entirely alive by people like you. So if you want to help pay the studio rent, we are on Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Good Trouble Show. And you can also support us right here on the YouTube. You can also help support us right here. I'm tongue-tied today on YouTube through memberships or super thanks. All of that stuff, it means the world to us, and it helps allow us to keep bringing you great guests like today with Marik. All right, hopefully I won't be tongue-tied for the rest of the interview. All right, let's get back to Marik. Walk us through, and again, folks at home, you can watch the entire 20-minute video that Marik did. It is very easy to understand. He explains it in just a very logical, methodical, yet not overly technical way that I think everyone, when you watch it, it's like a slam dunk case. It's completely obvious that Mick is basically just full of shit. So going ahead and just walk us through it, and then while you're walking us through these things, also point out to the audience what the debunker's claims are. The points he's saying, and why what you're showing is a clear-cut rebuttal, clear-cut evidence as to why their explanation is just, flat-out bullshit.
Yep. So I, former government guy, so I'm a bottom line up front guy. So I'll kind of pass along or cover the conclusion first, and then kind of explain how we got to that point. And I want to quickly highlight that this is not me. This is not just me. I am one of a few folks, a gentleman who goes by Zane Michael 1 on X is really the one who broke all of these discoveries. So credit to that individual, and then another one, that Shala, who some viewers might be familiar with, is a bona fide legitimate scientist and has been incredibly helpful. So I have to get that out of the way first. But first and foremost, this is the gimbal video. And I won't bore people, but these are the zoom and field of view settings. This basically tells you what camera setting we are in. We're in infrared. Right now, this camera is pointing 8 degrees to the left of the jet's nose. And this is the object. This is I appreciate that the layperson thinks that this is some unfocused blob. To anybody who's actually spent time looking at infrared imagery, this is a bizarre infrared signature. And I think that the bottom line from my perspective is that given the zoom and field of view setting that the camera is currently in, we're looking at a tiny sliver of the sky. This is only about 0.3 of a degree, so it's a tiny sliver of the sky. We are zoomed in as far as this system can go, and this is a tiny piece of the sky. And at the distance that we've established, the most important element of a lot of these analyses is the distance from the camera to the object. And we have, I think, quite conclusively established that the distance is where aviators said it was, and we've corroborated that with evidence in the video, but also in super sophisticated 3D analyses that rely on the azimuth and elevation angle of this camera. So we know where the camera's pointing, and we know where the jet is flying. That allows us to build a flight path in the 3D for this object at various distances. And at the distance that we have found, I think, again, beyond any kind of reasonable doubt, it's a very close distance. When you're flying in a fighter jet, the distance that we're at, about 6 to 8 nautical miles, is very, very close. And at that distance, given these camera and field of view settings, this is what an F-18, the plane that recorded the video, this is what it would look like. This is taken from the same camera system. This is an ATFLIR image. I just superimposed it. But again, at that 6 to 8 nautical mile range, a jet is clearly obvious, right? Wings, engine exhaust, the plume, cockpit. It looks like an aircraft. And yet the gimbal object, which we've come up with a rough estimate, again, given the zoom settings and the distance of about 15 to 20 feet across. So it's smaller than a fighter jet. And that's the key. It doesn't have any of those core elements or signatures of a jet. Again, there's no exhaust plume, no parent wings, certainly. And it only gets more interesting when we interrogate the flight path that it takes, and I'll get into that in a second. But here's the bottom line. This thing is zipping along at a decent rate of speed, and then it slows basically to a stop and then reverses direction in what we call a vertical U-turn, and I'll show that flight path in a second. But it does all of that without wings or an engine or any kind of discernible conventional means of propulsion. There's no right. This is not a jet engine, and it's certainly not a prop aircraft. And that alone is at the core of our findings. This is so perplexing because, again, at that distance, it looks nothing like any kind of aircraft that we know exists.
Now, what does it mean? So this object we see here is in black, and we see
Correct.
A portion of the wing of the superimposed aircraft in white. Explain to the viewer why is it colored that way?
Yeah, great question. So we are one of the most basic elements of infrared imagery analysis is the polarity, and all that means is hotter objects are either going to look white or black. So and I have to admit I goofed a little bit. This is not an exact comparison. The gimbal video is in black hot. So this object, because it's so saturated and you can't see any differentiation in the image, it is very, very hot. This is in black hot. This image, and again, not to confuse folks, but this was in white hot. So the exhaust, right, that's the hottest part of this aircraft, and the trail are going to be white in white hot. So the cockpit is much cooler, right? In this case, it's reversed. That's a very good question. And if you look at other images of their aircraft, you'll see different parts of the aircraft. Very interesting what parts are going to be hotter and cooler as it's flying. But in general, right, the dead giveaway is this exhaust plume, and that's a it's a standard signature that you see in aircraft. And this right here, again, is the bottom line. This is why it's so interesting. That object is much smaller than a fighter jet, and looks nothing like it. It doesn't have wings. So this gets into the observables. How is this thing? How's it flying? Right? How's it flying without any generating any lift that we know of? And where's the propulsion? That is really, again, the bottom line of why I find this so interesting.
Well, and the other thing that's interesting about this, now, again, this is a superimposed image of a jet just so you can get an idea of the scale. But the anomalous object above appears to be surrounded by a temperature change that surrounds the craft. What does that tell us? And then also, have you seen kind of a similar haze around prosaic aircraft?
Great question. So this was unfortunately touted when this image or this video first came out as, some kind of mysterious aura or what have you of cold air, right? So again, in a blackout image, this is much lighter. There's quite a bit of infrared imagery, and including from the system that recorded the video, that suggests to us that this is actually an artifact, and it's called edge sharpening, and you see it in a lot of other footage, again, from the ATFLIR camera system that recorded this. It's a very common artifact, and it's actually designed so that the operator, the pilots, and the air crew can see the outlines of a particular object more clearly, and it is an artifact. So yes, good flag, and that is an artifact that I think we have medium to high confidence that is not some kind of warp bubble or area of air around the object. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, please continue.
Yeah. So what I'd like to do is to kind of run through the two breakthroughs, if you will, from this last couple of months that really made this as much of a slam dunk as I think it is. And just briefly, when we stabilize the footage, and that means when we remove the effects of the jet's movement, so the jet banks throughout the video as it's recording the object, and it's also pitched slightly up. Most planes will have a slight upward pitch as they fly to generate lift and to go along their flight path. When you account for those visual elements and then stitch together the footage, you see that the camera actually pans downwards. You see this downward kind of slope, and I do need to quickly that is from our perspective, that is crystal clear evidence that the jet is closing in on a nearby object. And again, not to beat a dead horse, but the range to the object is the single most important element of this whole all of this analysis. Skeptics like Mick West claim that this object is actually a distant jet viewed tail on 30 miles in the distance, and it was completely misidentified. And yet we have here pretty crystal clear evidence that the camera pans down. And I, in my kind of explainer analysis video, I showed folks, if you're driving down a highway and you're driving up to an overpass, right? As that overpass gets closer and closer, you must look continually upward to keep it in your field of view, to keep observing it. And the same thing is true in the air, right? If you have an object that is slightly below you and you're closing in on it, eventually you're going to look straight down as you pass over it. And that's what we're seeing here. The camera is just panning down. It's looking downward as the jet closes in on a nearby object. If this were a distant jet, we would see the stitching here would be horizontal, and that would indicate, right, that the camera's not really moving. It's just locked on this jet that's flying away from the jet that's recording the video. Hope that makes sense. It's really a perspective thing, and I think that's the key. I'll just note that this is very subtle. It's only about 0.4 of a degree of a downward tilt or pan by the camera, but it is enough to give us very high confidence that the camera was looking down. I will say that I think perhaps one of the more interesting elements to the panning camera was the fact that at the end you can see that the camera actually appears to pan up slightly. You can see this section right here that's circled in red. You see that little jump up there. And that gets really, really interesting because we can reconstruct the flight path in 3D using the data from the video, and something very interesting happens when we account for all of the data in the video. We get this, and this is a paper that my colleague Yannick and I presented to AIAA, which is I think the leading aeronautical engineering group in the world. And I encourage anybody to. It's also an archive, so I encourage anybody to view this. We go into all the details of how this is found, but really the key is, at the distance that the aviators, the air crew, describe this object being from their jet, we find exactly the anomalous, perplexing flight path that they describe seeing on radar. And lo and behold, that path ends with an altitude climb at the end. It's, again, this is viewed from the side. This is a lateral view. We call this a vertical U-turn, right? It's like a J-hook. And that little again, when we stitch those images together, there's that little section at the end where you see the camera pan up slightly, and that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing this remarkable match again between the video and the 3D reconstructed flight path. And we owe Ryan Graves, again, Lieutenant Graves, who was airborne during the incident. He was not in the plane that recorded it, but he was airborne during that exercise, and then reviewed all the data and the tapes afterwards. He put this together as kind of a demonstration of what he saw. It was so perplexing that he's committed this to memory, it seems, because it was so odd. But the object, the gimbal object, is trucking along in one direction, and this is really interesting. You hear the air crew mentioning that there's a quote unquote fleet of other objects accompanying it, and they were in this kind of like an echelon formation. The fleet is a whole other element of this that is super fascinating that just don't have time to get into. But the gimbal object trucks along in one direction. The objects then turn around, basically make a 180-degree turn with a radius of turn. So right, it's like a rounded turn, whereas the gimbal object comes to, as Lieutenant Graves remembers it, came to a brief stop on the radar and then proceeds in the opposite direction without any radius of turn, right? And that is a very bizarre turn on a dime, right? That's the best way we can describe it. I need to clarify that this right here is a view, the God's eye view. We're looking straight down. So this is a top-down view, a radar view of what he saw. And again, lo and behold, when we plug in all of the data and the range that the aviators gave with very, very high confidence, we found exactly the flight path described by Lieutenant Graves. That is either, again, it's an extraordinary coincidence or the object's true flight path. And again, given the fact that we see that altitude increase at the very end of the footage, as we see here, we're very, very confident that is the actual flight path. And that makes it all the more intriguing because that, right, what kind of object without wings or an engine can do that, can flip around in just a couple hundred feet? A fighter jet requires several thousand feet to conduct a maneuver like that. This thing does it in just a few hundred feet. That only deepens the mystery of this video. It is truly perplexing. That's a lot of talking. I'll stop. I'll hand it over to you, Matt, if you have any questions. But I've got a few other things I can talk about.
So first, go back to the radar plan view radar display. Now, I don't know the symbology of this display, but you indicated that this was provided by Lieutenant Ryan Graves to you, correct?
That's right. He put this out actually on a Substack article. So this is public.
Okay.
Anybody, I think it's called Everyday Occurrences on either Substack or Medium that anybody can look this up.
Okay, so in the middle, and I have an aviation background. So in the middle is the representation of the aircraft of the FA-18
that
recorded the video. You know, so then you're seeing a 360-degree sort of plan view of what would be around that aircraft. Now, correct. I don't know. I don't know the symbology of this, but I know on those particular kind of map presentation displays, you can actually change the scale of the display. So in terms of nautical miles from the aircraft. So I am guessing that what he is showing here, somewhere on that display in the symbology there, it probably is displaying what the scale of the display is. Hence, how he can say with great certainty that these things are X number of nautical miles away from the nose of the aircraft. So that'd be the first thing that I would say there. And then also as well, as you pointed out, the fleet of these things. My question is, has Mick ever, or any of these debunkers at this MetaBunk outfit, have they ever addressed the map view displaying multiple targets and then changing direction on a dime?
Well, you're really getting to the core of the issue here, right? And this is the debunker methodology, the MO. If I can't explain it, I just ignore it. No, to answer your question, no, they have nothing. There's no reasonable explanation that they have provided for the radar tracks. And you can also hear, just to be very clear, in the cockpit audio of the video, you can hear the backseater saying, "Hey, is that our LNS?" And that refers to the primary radar target that the pilot has designated. And the pilot says, "Yes, that is our LNS. That is the target that we have selected on radar. The camera is slaved to the target that's on radar. It's looking directly at what is on the radar." So great point, Matt. They twist themselves into pretzels to explain away the fact that they have very high confidence that this was at the very close range described by aviators, and I'll put it up here, but the context is critical, and this is stuff, to your point, that is just hand waved away. They just ignore it. They say, "Oh nope, it's a distant jet, misidentified jet." They completely ignore the radar data. They ignore the fact. I think this is also super interesting. This incident occurred about 10 minutes after the Go Fast incident, this is the very well-known image in the bottom left in this screen here, but it was recorded by the same aircrew. So the aircrew that recorded Gimbal also recorded Go Fast. Go Fast, Lieutenant Graves has told us recently, the aircrew were tracking the object in the video was one of 4 that were traveling in formation about several hundred miles off the coast of Florida in very close proximity to an aircraft carrier. Again, you have to ignore the Go Fast. To your point, you have to ignore the fleet. You have to ignore the radar data. You have to ignore pilots have, quote, zero doubt. I'm quoting right here, right? This is what Graves told me for this Hill piece, that this object was close by. And that, again, in and of itself makes it an anomalous case. And oh, by the way, we just happened to confirm, right, the flight path that they saw on radar in the data. We confirm the flight path in the video with that altitude increase, and then the rotation, which we can get into, also matches the flight path. So everything aligns here. It's really quite extraordinary. And look, I'll give the debunkers and the pseudo-skeptics credit. They pushed people like us to strengthen our case, right? Now we have an airtight case because they kept saying, no, X, Y, and Z. And now we've I think presented enough evidence, data to make any reasonable person, believe and understand that this object was where the aircrew said it was.
And I understand as well that one of the things Mick West said at some point was that it was a failure of multiple radar systems, that it wasn't just one. And that was, why you heard perhaps people saying kind of saying the same things, and his defense was like, oh, well, multiple systems failed at one time. Am I accurate in what he said?
Yeah, that's right. Mick and Co.'s theory requires just this just a comical kind of alignment, and you just at this point you can't hand wave it away anymore with what we've just presented with the match between, again, the altitude increase and the 3D flight path. But yes, you'll see that second quote down here is at least per Lieutenant Graves. The jet that recorded the video was tracking this on their radar, as you can hear on the cockpit audio from the video. But also when Graves refers to off-board information from data link, that means other sensors were pumping radar data and other sensor data into the jet, and we're tracking these objects. So again, to your point, yes, that requires just this comedy of errors and failures that is just, I think at this point, just not even worth addressing anymore, because they can't make a coherent case for what actually happened.
Exactly. Do me a favor. Go back to the images of the map display.
Yep.
So one of the things that I want to point out to everyone, and that Mark just referenced, is okay. So if you're looking at this overhead, this God's eye view. You have the aircraft in the middle. Now the air-to-air radar on any kind of on any fighter jet, we'll just say that. So an AWACS would be the exception. So the range of view of that air-to-air radar is radomes and there are other sensors along the aircraft, but the primary air-to-air radar dome sits in the nose of the aircraft. So that is able to paint what is in front of the airplane. Now, behind the airplane, if in other air-to-air situations, you could see targets that would be behind the aircraft. So the question would be, well, if the radar that is on the nose of the airplane can only see forward, well, how is the onboard radar display, in this case the map display in the Hornet, able to see this? And you touched on this earlier, and the way that's done is it is a data uplink. It is a fusion of the phased array radars on multiple ships in the carrier battle group. So all of these different radars, these phased array radars, and I'll also point out too that phased array radars, which they don't move, they're solid, or they don't move, have insanely high resolution, like being able to see like a basketball accurately 100 miles out. So you have all of these ships in the carrier battle group that all or some of them have these phased array surface-to-air radar, and they fuse that data. That data then goes into fused together, goes in an uplink to the jets. So the jets essentially are seeing in this presentation are seeing a fusion of multiple radar systems. So it's not like Mick can say, oh, well, that the radar on the airplane is faulty. You're seeing a fusion of multiple ships in the carrier battle group that are creating a fused, summarized presentation of what is in the air around the aircraft, not only in front of it, but behind it. And again, it points to what Mick is saying is just utter bullshit.
You're right, and I believe that's called Link 16. So, and if anybody's interested in kind of diving into this, but I think that capability is called Link 16. And then I'll just highlight to your point. There was after the mission, after this bizarre incident, the aircrew was rightfully perplexed, right? And Lieutenant Graves recalls he was in the room. He was in the room in the debrief, when the debriefing occurred. You had a crowd, a room full of fighter pilots, air crews, and intelligence officers who were so perplexed, looking through all of the data, to your point, looking through everything that had been recorded, all the sensor, all the radars, right, certainly the infrared imagery. They were so perplexed by this that they called the strike group admiral, right, the senior officer, called the strike group admiral down, and he ultimately was so infuriated by these objects interfering with their pre-combat deployment training exercises that he reported this up to what we now know is ATIP, to Jay Stratton and Lou Elizondo at the Pentagon, and that's the rest is history.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. So you have in this room a group of senior leadership from the carrier strike group. You have a whole host of pilots, and I have not heard any of them say that somebody said in the audience, "Oh yeah, those are balloons," or "Boy, all of those phased array radars, they all failed at once." None of that obviously was said in that room because, as you mentioned, this was elevated up the chain.
Well, yes, absolutely. And sorry to digress, but you just mentioned balloons, and that reminded me of our good friend, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the former director of the Pentagon UFO analysis office, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, who widely is viewed as either a bad faith actor or incompetent, and I can tell you why. I asked him in person in November of 2023, and then in a Zoom discussion about, I don't know, maybe several months later, hey, what about the gimbal video? And he told me twice that the gimbal video, I have to just state that this is, I think, arguably the most recognizable UFO footage that's out there, right? It's in every documentary, the news, whenever there's a segment on UAP or UFOs, the gimbal object, it's a very, very recognizable video. And the former director of the Pentagon's UFO analysis office told me that the gimbal video is nothing more than a balloon reflecting the sun. Astounding. Number one, because gimbal was filled at night, so we can already toss that out. Not only that, the air crew you can hear them in the cockpit, in the video, in the audio. They're saying, the objects, the fleet and the gimbal objects, they're all moving against 120 knot winds, right? We're talking about more or less hurricane force winds, and they're moving against. So look, I don't know what Kirkpatrick's issue was, whether he's incompetent, was confused, or maybe there's something more nefarious at play. But your comment that these are clearly not balloons, I think is well taken and well made.
Okay, yeah, please continue with what you got in your video here.
Yeah, so I will. I just want to quickly touch on the fact that the object's rotation is very, very interesting. And what I will do is briefly just note that there are 4 distinct rotations in the gimbal video, and I'll show that in a second. But what is fascinating is that the third rotation is much different than the others. It is long and continuous, and the first 2 are quick, brief, rapid rotations. The third one stands out, and the third one just happens to match exactly with the flight path that was retrieved, again, through 3D recreations at the range given by aviators down to the second. I mean, it is an extraordinary match. So I'll display, this is a little animation here that shows how this match actually, how extraordinary this match actually is. So as we play through, you can see the first 2, and then you'll watch, again, this is the side view, and here it goes. You see this thing rotate in that long, continuous turn that matches exactly with the direction reversal, right? That vertical U-turn, the apex of that vertical U-turn, quite extraordinary. And West, to be fair to the debunkers, they claim that this is nothing more than an artifact of the camera pod, the targeting pod, as it rotates. A lot of issues with that theory. I go into them in detail in my analysis video. Frankly, it's not worth expanding on too much here. It gets into really technical rabbit holes that I don't think are worth going into. I encourage folks to read the paper, but the bottom line is the patent and the ATFLIR patent holder explicitly refute what West and co claim occurred and how the camera system rotates as it tracks a target. And it did not rotate in steps.
Okay, so let me interrupt here. So you're saying that the guy that invented these multi-million-dollar sensor pods, the guy that invented these things that are, I mean, who knows how many multi-millions of dollars these things are.
Yes.
You're saying that the guy that invented this thing, that came up with this tech, that actually holds the patent, said that Mick West's theory is bullshit?
Well, he told me that in a phone call as we watched the video together. I asked him, hey, could this be an artifact of the pod rotating? And he said no. And I reflected that in my email. I looped Mick into the email chain. Then he said, okay. I can only stick to what's in the patent. And the way that he described the pod's operation is the exact opposite. I cannot stress this enough. The exact opposite of what Mick and co claim occurred in the Gimbal incident. Now, I'll try to summarize it as briefly as I can, but this pod rotates as it tracks a target, something like this, right? Again, there's those 4 steps, and this is hopelessly complex, and this is how the debunkers operate because they know most people won't take the time to dive into these details. But he says that the rotations of the object are actually the pod rotating. But when the pod is not rotating, these really fine internal mirrors track the object when the pod, again, is not rotating. Bottom line is that the patent refutes that, and the patent holder told me, no, actually, those really fine internal mirrors stay centered. They don't move around to track an object. The whole system, the whole function of the system is to keep those really fine internal components centered. And here's what the patent holder told me in emails. He says very distinctly, very clearly that the whole system, again, operates in the opposite manner of what Mick claims occurred in the video.
How did Mick respond to these emails?
And I looped him in. He made his case, and the patent holder said, hey, I'm at the limit of what I can discuss, and that's it. Again, and to be clear, that's not the only expert I consulted. I reached out, cold emailed some of the top academic experts in this infrared technology. Indium antimonide is the technical name of it. Literally, the world's top experts disagree. They disagree with Mick very clearly. One of the top academic experts roped in one of the top government experts. Same thing, disagreed with Mick's theory. So not only do the data and the evidence support what the aviators claim and refute Mick's theory, the experts do as well. And the technical documentation, the patents do as well. And oh, by the way, if you actually dive into it, logic falsifies this as well. So I don't know what case there is left that our debunker friends could put out. There's been crickets from them following the analysis video, and I think that's the MO. If they're stumped, they just go silent, and I've seen that over and over and over and over again with other videos. That there's never any acknowledgement. There's never acknowledgement that that's interesting. Maybe we could be wrong. No, there's enormous hubris and investment here that goes beyond scientific objectivity, and we're squarely in disingenuous territory here with how wedded the pseudo skeptics and the skeptics are to this theory and others.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, what else you got?
Well, in a few minutes, I'd like to just maybe quickly recap. I'll just make it very brief. We have the aviators' accounts those can be confirmed in 3D analyses, and then the video confirms the 3D analyses. Open and shut case, in my opinion. I quickly want to maybe cover what I think is a very interesting a video. And actually, I will, just because there have been a few folks in the online commentariat that have complained that we did not address one very narrow element, despite the whole theory I think being falsified, that we didn't talk about this one element that Mick and co raised about. There are these supposed bumps before the object rotates. The screen kind of jumps, and they say, "Oh, that's evidence that the pod is causing the rotation." In fact, I think this is important to point out. When you look at those bumps very closely, you can actually see that they're moving in a different manner from the horizon and the background. You can see the clouds on the left here are moving more or less left to right. The object, on the other hand, is moving apparently up and down, right? So you have a decoupling, a separation between the object and the background. And you see that even more clearly in that last bump or jump, and that object is clearly getting knocked off center. And I think there's a very easy explanation for this, and it goes back to what the patent holder told me, and that is that the object moved slightly. No distant jet would do that. No distant jet would move slightly. And then what we're seeing is the system, the camera system recentering that fine mirror, because again, that is the core operation of the system, is to keep that super sensitive internal mirror perfectly centered on a target, and that's what we see those bumps. So again, this implies that the object moves slightly right before it rotates, which in of itself is interesting and also falsifies yet again the distant jet theory. So just wanted to get that out there because again, there's some chatter that had not been covered. Quickly, very briefly, I think we can go for another hour on other videos, but I just want to quickly touch maybe on the Omaha video. And this is super interesting in the context of all the drone incursions we've heard about. I think many people have seen this video. This is what appears to be a spherical object that slowly descends into the water. Context is so important here. This occurred among months-long swarming incursions, swarming events around Navy ships, sometimes 100 miles plus off the coast of California, Southern California, in the San Diego area. Super bizarre. Now you put that into context with the Barksdale Air Force Base incursions just a few weeks ago, which were unbelievably brazen. Oh, by the way, Barksdale is the home of Global Strike Command, which oversees nuclear missiles and air-launched nuclear weapons. Some of your viewers might be familiar with Langley Air Force Base that had those just unbelievably brazen incursions in December of 2023. Same with Wright-Patterson. Radar was tracking these objects around Wright-Patterson. I think many people are familiar with the UFO lore at Wright-Patterson. Bottom line is these unknown drone incursions are very bizarre because very little imagery has come off of those incidents. And this is one of the only incidents that I know of where there's actual imagery recorded, and it just happens to be completely bizarre and perplexing. And I think the key element here is you have this round, spherical perhaps object, and it moves against really strong winds. And you see here this little animation. It shows that at the beginning of the video, the camera is actually stationary. The operator's manually moving the camera, and when the camera stops, you can literally see the thing moving from left to right against 40-knot winds. So that's no balloon, first of all. And if you go through kind of all the analyses, it does not descend at the beginning of the video, but at the end it does. It's not here's the the object descending. It appears to descend into the water quite clearly. This is the horizon line in red. West claims that this is some distant something far away that disappears behind the horizon. And here's the problem. I've relentlessly asked Mick West, hey, Mick, what is this? Provide a theory that matches or that aligns with all of the data. And he goes silent. He cannot, no debunker, no pseudo-skeptic can come up with a plausible explanation for what this is. It's not a plane flying away. The infrared signature in that Omaha video doesn't shrink. It stays the same size. Over the course of 7 minutes, the video is actually two separate videos spliced together, separated by, I think, 6 minutes or so. So you're talking about 7 minutes of video. If it's a jet flying away, as it gets further away, it'll look smaller and smaller as there's less heat, less infrared energy coming into the sensor. So it's not a jet flying away. It's certainly not a balloon. And oh, by the way, it plops into the water. And oh, by the way, it was tracked on radar. And it was again part of one of those mass swarming events off the coast. So super bizarre, but it's just another textbook example of skeptics, pseudo-skeptics completely just going silent when they're ever challenged to actually provide a theory, a viable theory, or to address a very clear falsification of their claims.
I want to read to you. So I went on MetaBunk, which is, of course, Mick West's sort of, in my view, bullshit mill of putting out just a bunch of garbage. And I specifically went there looking to see how he reacted to this analysis, this wonderful analysis you put out on Monday. And I want to read this to you. I'm going to bring it up on the screen here. Let's see here. So name of the thread, the Gimbal UFO. Marik claims new findings, falsified prosaic explanations. Mick literally says here, I've not watched it in full, but it seems to be Marik summarizing his old arguments from years ago and adding in the odd theories from Zane M. Then Zane replies, Mick, you say you haven't watched Marik's video in full, yet you've already framed the entire thing as just, quote, recycling old arguments, closed quote, plus, quote, odd theories from Zane. That's not exactly starting from a position of good faith analysis. The core points aren't old or odd. And he goes through it, and Zane summarizes here, these aren't fringe additions. They're testable issues with the current sim and refinements. Dismissing them without addressing the specifics, especially the go fast failure and frustrum roll from pitch, doesn't make the prosaic explanation stronger. It just avoids hard points. Happy to discuss any of the actual technical points if you're willing to engage with them, and it just kind of goes on and on. And I want to read to you. So we don't publicly speak about this, but we have an intelligence analysis product that basically mimics Palantir's Gotham platform, where we have ingested a serious amount of data. We can produce full-blown counterintelligence assessments, OSINT assessments. And so what I did is I put into the system the entire conversation back and forth with Mick West in this particular thread. And the intelligence analysis that it came back with was assessment. This doesn't look like a good faith analyst encountering evidence that challenges his theory and working through it. It looks like information management, controlling the narrative around a theory that has been materially damaged but not publicly conceded. The key tell, a confident analyst with a strong theory welcomes falsification tests because passing them strengthens the theory. West's behavior, avoiding the go-fast control test, minimizing unexplained rotation, demanding standards he doesn't meet, deflecting credentials, is consistent with someone who knows the model has problems but is managing the perception rather than updating the conclusion. This aligns with your report RB 2026 077 finding that stated, this is again our intelligence product, West's framework naturally produces outputs that support institutional narratives, whether that's deliberate or structural. The behavioral pattern in this thread is avoidance of the strongest counter evidence. There you go. Couldn't have put it better myself. Yeah. It's and other things that we've fed into the system. The intelligence assessment that it consistently puts out is that Mick is a disingenuous actor. He is. Its assessment is he is likely doing this at the behest of government or not really sure what. But again, your analysis that you've put together with these other fine individuals, the fact that you have actually have a published paper on this, and I would point out that Mick West and his sort of cosplaying scientists, armchair physicists in their mother's basement, have not produced any sort of scientific paper. And here you actually have put out a paper, and I guess my question to you, the paper that you put out, have you heard any rebuttal from anyone in the aerospace business or people that are part of these publications that have said, Marik, your analysis is completely off in that paper? What kind of response did you receive with that? Unfortunately, nobody we've gotten very little official formal response. We'll get an email every once in a while from somebody who's interested in it, which is great to see, but certainly no pushback. There's been zero falsifications, right? Because everything we've done is verifiable. And not only that, West himself concurs with the fact that the flight path that is found at the range, again, given by aviators, can be found in the data. It's in his own simulator. So nobody can dispute the data. It's just a matter of interpretation. And I think the bottom line is the analysis video that I just put out, it builds on that paper, and it basically is the nail in the coffin to the prosaic explanations for the gimbal video. Absolutely. And if you, which in my opinion, you have completely proven this to be anomalous, and also demonstrated the sort of disingenuous information management that appears to be coming from Mick and his acolytes, which then makes you think, well, if Mick is being disingenuous and ignoring evidence about this, what else is he being disingenuous about? And in my book, that is a giant red flag. Anyway, well, thank you so much for joining us. This has really been a fantastic discussion. Again, I encourage everyone, go to the YouTube description, watch this absolutely just knocked it out of the park analysis of this particular UAP case. So how can the folks at home follow your work?
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. So I am on X at mvonren, MVONREN. And then I think you mentioned, but I do a monthly news roundup for the Soul Foundation, and that's on the Soul Foundation's YouTube page. And then I put out an occasional opinion piece at The Hill. I gotta get back to work.
Well, Mark, thanks for joining us. This has really been great, and I look forward to your next in-depth analysis of this insanely bizarre UAP phenomenon. Thanks for joining us.
Matt, thanks so much for having me. It's been a true pleasure.
Folks, I hope you enjoyed our interview with Marc von Rennenkampff, and if you enjoyed it, you're going to really enjoy this episode next.